Steve Garner from USA Today, as the postseason is upon us, and it got a little chippy last night between the Pirates and the Cubs. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing fine. The pitching was pretty phenomenal in the first two games. So,
well, yeah,
at least for the winning team.
Yeah, you were dead on when you talked about the Yankees. I mean, they were leaking oil. They weren't playing good baseball late in the season. It came back to rear its ugly head. Houston, they got some pop in that lineup. They had solid pitching as well. That's always going to beat the hitting. How about last night, though? What was your whole take on the Arrieta fiasco? And look, it's part of the game, plunking players. I get that. I don't know if you deem the one pitch that hit Arrieta intentional or not, but the bottom line is, if you're the starting pitcher, if you're a potential Cy Young Award winner, even going forward, you know what? You got plunked. You're rattling them. You're frustrating them. Just take the base. Just take the base.
Yeah, I think so. But with Arrieta, I think he just needs to concentrate on what makes him good and I'm getting some echo here, right? So it's hard to
Go ahead, Steve. I got you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, yeah, it just for Arrieta, he's got to concentrate on pitching, as you said, and he's in the middle of a gem anyway, and so just go ahead. Sure, you can show some fire and all of that. That's fine, but to have it turn into a bench clearing incident, I thought that was a little much. And then Sean Rodriguez going after seemingly everybody and inanimate objects as well seemed a little bit uncalled for, but a little frustration, I think, showing from the Pirates because Arrieta was just so good.
Yeah, exactly. And I was joking with Rodriguez. I mean, he had a good couple of jabs in there with crosses, but Gatorade jug doesn't hit back. Texas set to take on Toronto. I like that pitching matchup. Galarrete and Price, and then Houston to take on Kansas City. I want to get to the Mets and the Dodgers for a minute. When you heard about Matt Harvey getting stuck in traffic and how it was potentially leaked by the Mets PR staff through the Post and the media up in New York, I mean, is this really a big deal that he was late in traffic, or is this basically where you turn around and say, this is just who Matt Harvey is?
I think you've got to at least say something like this might be expected with Matt Harvey. It's always something, and as long as it's not a distraction to the Mets and their preparation. Now, Harvey's not going to start until Game 3, so that's one thing. It's not essential that he's there. As long as they kind of have an idea that he's committed to winning, I think that's the important thing. And, with some players, Manny Ramirez comes to mind.
Yep.
You just let Manny be Manny, and as long as he produces on the field, then you can cut him a little bit of slack. I think Harvey kind of ends up in that same boat, and when it's all said and done, a lot of back and forth in the media over his innings limit and everything. If he produces in the playoffs, I think that's all that matters. And right now, the Mets can't afford to waste time, energy, and anything else worrying about what their Game 3 starter is doing on a workout day. They need to be prepared to make sure they're ready to go in Game 1 against the Dodgers.
And you look at the series, a lot of people are picking L.A. as a heavy favorite against the underdog Mets. And the Mets, when you look at their starting rotation, these guys have no postseason pitching experience. But then, of course, you look at the Los Angeles Dodgers, and we've talked so much about Greinke, we've talked so much about Kershaw. This is right exactly where they want to be. This to me, it seems like a tough spot for the Mets here because you're not always going to rely on your big bats. I mean, sometimes when you get these guys, Greinke and Kershaw, in a groove, they're really tough to get a hit off of, and I think that might frustrate the batters a little bit. I don't know if the Mets offense goes south here. It could be a short series, but how do you handicap this one?
Well, I think you're right about that, but the Mets did, down the stretch, had one of the better offenses in all of baseball, and so that gives them at least some bit of confidence that they can hit even the best pitchers in baseball. And on the other hand, the Dodgers offense was really poor down the stretch. So yeah. I think the Mets feel like if they can just hang with Kershaw and Greinke and extend it into a bullpen game, that's where they can have the advantage later on in the game. And if it goes into extra innings, that's even better because you get the Dodgers' big advantage out of the way. And if you can do that, then you have a shot at pulling it off, especially, these short series, 5 best of 5.
Yep.
Anything can happen, and we've seen that so many times.
And what people fail to remember is in postseason baseball, when a pitcher's on and he's on, if you get an opportunity, look, case in point last night, Pirates had bases loaded in 6, they had 1 out, and Marte grounds into a double play. I mean, so I guess my point is sometimes opportunities are very far and few, but when you get them, and you can take advantage of them. The Yankees weren't able to do that, and we saw last night that the Pirates were frustrated. They weren't able to do that. A couple more quickies for you, and then I want to ask you a question or two on the Phils going forward. Most intriguing matchup right now with these AL DSs. What's the most intriguing matchup in your opinion?
I think it's Houston, Kansas City. The Royals were the upstarts last year, and maybe in the playoffs sooner than many people thought. I think the shoe's on the other foot this year. It's Houston's the underdog, the darling, and maybe peaking a little bit earlier than a lot of people figured. And Kansas City, with their playoff experience last year going to the World Series, more of a veteran team. So to have those two, it's kind of an interesting parallel, and one of these two teams is going to make it to the ALCS. So I think that's really the one to keep in mind. I think it's a lot closer of a matchup. I expect the Blue Jays to pretty much handle Texas fairly easily. So, yeah, I think this Houston-Kansas City series could easily go 5 and be one of the most interesting we'll see in the playoffs.
Last one before I move on to the Phils for a second. When you look at how the wild card is constructed and you look at the NL Central, you have a 97-win Chicago team. You have a 98-win Pirates team. You have a 100-win St. Louis team. I mean, any other year, you're like, wow, these are 3-4 of the best teams in the National League, and yet to have it come down to one game, I don't know, the purist in me says I'd rather see that into a series, but it's never going to happen. What's your thoughts on that and just the quote-unquote play-in game?
I think it does provide one thing that baseball really likes, and in this age of, pay attention for an entire 162-game season as much. And it gives you that do-or-die, super high drama for one game. And I think baseball likes that. And I think the teams, while they may not like it, kind of see the benefits for the game itself. And so, with Pittsburgh, they could have, if they had done better against one team, the Cincinnati Reds. They had a losing record against the Reds this year. If they could have beaten the Reds a couple more times, they wouldn't have been in that playoff game. And so they would have been the division champs and get to host. So you do control your own destiny, and I think that's one of the things people get upset about. No, the rules are there. You know what they are. Now go out and win.
Yeah, it's interesting because ESPN Outside the Lines is right now running a wild card fallout. And you're right. You can say the same thing about the Yankees. I think they thought they were going to coast and Toronto wasn't going to catch them. And we saw how that panned out. Last one for you. Ryan Howard, 36-year-old, the final season of his 5-year, $125 million contract extension he signed back in 2010. The Phils have a couple young players. They have Darren Ruff, obviously. You're looking at Howard's not as productive as he once was as an everyday player. His numbers against righties a little more respectable. Then conversely, when you look at Ruff, he struggled here and there. But I think the Phils are in a precarious position because if you look at their overhaul that they're going to do in the rebuilding and replenishing of the farm system, what do you do with a guy like Ryan Howard? Do you just let this last year, the final year, ride out? Because from those that I speak to, including yourself, it seems like no one wants to even touch this guy.
You're right, and obviously he needs to go to an American League team to even have a chance to be successful because he's a liability on defense, plain and simple. I think the one thing, if the Phillies want to kickstart the rebuilding process, they're going to have to eat an awful lot of that contract and try and trade him to an American League team. I don't know. It's interesting because we saw maybe up until this year teams preferring in the American League to use the DH spot to cycle through guys, give guys rest. There weren't, maybe David Ortiz was the only guy who was a DH only. This season we saw a lot more of that in the American League. Miguel Sano, DH for the most part all season long. Victor Martinez, in addition to David Ortiz, Alex Rodriguez. So the teams that could possibly take on that kind of a contract don't have the spot to be able to take Ryan Howard in. So I think the Phillies pretty much are going to have to live with a platoon situation where Ryan Howard plays against right-handers and Darren Ruff plays against left-handers, and just hope both stay healthy, and if not, then the other one takes over. And it's not an enviable situation because he's really the one guy that the Phillies have left that is part of that, the old Phillies. And the sooner they can get started on the rebuilding process, the better.
Yeah, and you figure they keep a guy like Ruiz around another season or two just to groom their young catcher as well. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how they handle that going into spring training. All right, my friend, always appreciate it. Enjoy the ALDS and the ALCS. I know you'll be traveling. Hopefully we can pop you back on for a couple moments.
Sounds great, Rich.